Thank you so much. Just a little bit about myself. I'm from Senegal. I came to the United States at a very young age. My father worked at the Senegalese embassy as a military attaché. So when he went back home, I stayed in the United States, and I went to high school in Atlanta, went to college in South Carolina, and I went back to Atlanta to to pursue a graduate degree in public administration. But my being here is not by accident. I think as an African immigrant myself, I think I'm in a good place to be able to take my experience to help other immigrants have the same opportunity that I have, or that I had, to support them, provide with capacity building skills, technical assistance, and so on and so on. I think what made it for me was, as a college student in South Carolina, I went to college with very little resources. I didn't have anywhere to pay for my tuition. My parents wasn't there to pay for my tuition. I paid for my tuition with my 2 legs. I was a soccer player. I was given a partial scholarship, but it wasn't easy. Scholarship paid for very little, so I had to find ways to pay for the remaining. So I had a very tough time in college. For the first 3 years of college, this carpet is actually a lot softer than where I slept for many nights in college. As a proud Muslim, I will fast during the month of Ramadan, and I will have maybe peanuts just to eat and water. Until my final year of college, I don't remember ever paying for my books on time. I always pay for them either half, when the semester was almost over, which meant I was always catching up to my classmates or just trying to get a passing grade. So I went through those challenges as a young immigrant. My roommate and I, we used to pick up pennies when we saw them on the floor. I'm embarrassed to do it now, but back then we used to pick them up and save it in a jar, because there was a McDonald's on the corner that had 15-cent cheeseburger on Wednesdays. And that cheeseburger was our buffet, because I was in very, hard conditions. So I overcame those challenges, and through my career, I came into DC government under a program called Capital City Fellows Program. It's a mayoral program which I recommend to all graduate students. They recruit graduate students to come in, and they give you 2 years. During those 2 years, you can rotate in any agencies you want, work on any projects you want, and then move on to the next agency. The goal is for you to get practical training, learn experience, to grow as a manager, as a professional, and eventually they want you to stay in the district and work here. So I came in 2011, very competitive. When I came in for the interview, there was 92 people being interviewed for only 6 slots that were available at the time. So I was lucky enough to be selected. And my first job was actually in the Office of African Affairs, which is now where I'm now the director of. So full circle. And through all of that, my goal is to bring my own experience, both personal and professional, to support other Africans. So just a little bit about the office. The office was created in 2006 when the community sort of demanded that there needs to be an office in African Affairs. I don't know if my research is right, but I look across the United States. We are the only jurisdiction that has a mayor's office in African Affairs. Every other jurisdiction has maybe a commission. We have a commission of African Affairs and an office on African Affairs, which is all part of the executive office of the mayor. So I can actually brag and say that I'm the only director of Office of African in the United States, but I don't want to go there. We have a commission. Well, actually, before the commission, so our goal is the mission of the office is to serve as advocates for the African community. Essentially, our job is to serve as a liaison between the African community and the District of Columbia government, to make sure that they have access to resources. They are aware of the resources of the services, and they have access to them, just like the Latino community, just like the Asian community. The Commission on African Affairs has 15 members, all appointed by the mayor, and their job is to serve as an advisor to the office, to myself essentially, and to the mayor, and to council, to bring to council issues dealing with African community and policy recommendations on how to address them, and any issues that they need to know when it comes to the African community. Our values are not a surprise. Advocacy when it comes to health, jobs, education, constituent services. People come to my office every day for looking for jobs, needing help with health insurance. Every other issue that people normally deal with, housing, Obviously, this area is very expensive. So all of these are issues that people come to my office, and they need some support. Collaboration is a, key thing for me when I came in. I spent a lot of time talking about how we need to collaborate, not just among Africans, but also among non-Africans and among institutions like George Mason and other respected institutions, and innovation, inclusiveness, and obviously diversity, which means that you don't have to be African to be there. You can be Russian or Chinese or from Switzerland, as long as you are interested in learning something about the African community, as long as you're interested in acquiring new skills. My office is open to anyone who's interested, and you're more than welcome to come in for internships, fellowships, and all of that. So let's talk a little bit about the demographics. But what I want to do first is, it would be very tough for me to talk about demographic at the local level without talking about it at the national level, because I want you to get a picture of what the community looks like. So today, there's about 1.6 million African Americans in the United States. This is according to the latest census and the American Community Survey. And you see that on the source, you see SODR. It's actually State of the Africans in the District. This is a report that I worked on in this office when I was a fellow. It was a 65-page report detailing everything you need to know about the African community. And it was actually the very first report of its kind in the district. So there's about 1.6 million African Americans in the United States. And as you can see, from 1960 to today, the numbers have grown at a very fast pace. So the African population represents about 4.1% of the foreign-born, and the numbers keep growing. We are the fastest growing African population in the United States. Even so, then some experts like Randy Capps and those at the Migration Policy Institute have argued that when you look at the pace to which our population is growing, it's growing faster than those from Latin American countries. And there are a lot of issues relating to that. Obviously, 1960 is when most African countries gained their independence. And the very first one were diplomats, those who came to study in the United States. But during the 1980s, between 1980 and 2000, this is where most growth did occur. And why is that? A lot of it has to deal with, again, most African countries were just sort of looking at the West for better opportunity for their citizens, but also in the United States, a couple of immigration laws that did take place. The very first one is the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1976, which allowed for Caribbeans and certain immigrants to be able to immigrate to the United States and get student visas and such. The Refugee Act of 1980, which adopted the UN protocol, which actually gave about 500,000 visas to refugees to come to the United States. The 1986 Immigration Reform Act, enabling undocumented immigrants to actually apply for their relatives to come to the United States. The 1990 Immigration Act, which increased the number of skilled visas for companies and corporations. And just recently, the President Obama's Executive Action on Immigration. Even though this one hasn't taken effect yet, we estimate that, if we come back here 10 years from now to do the same presentation, we'll see the number will increase just because of this act. So this is just one small component to why the number of immigrants has been growing since between 1980 and 2000, which is actually the biggest. And if you look at the numbers between 1980 to today, the number of African immigrants have grown by 700,000. National profile. Nigeria population, African immigrants from Nigeria represent 14% of the African population. Ethiopia is 10%. Kenya, Ghana, these are the largest. And the others are the Senegal that represent maybe 3%, those that are 2%, 3%. But the largest population is from Nigeria and Ethiopia. And the numbers are similar to actually what you see at the local level when we get to it. This is the profile of Africans by region of birth. At the national level, 39% of all African immigrants in the United States come from, 29% are Eastern African countries. These are the Somalians, the Ethiopians, and such. 27% from Northern Africa. These are the Algeria, Morocco. And the largest percent is from Western Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, Francophone countries. And so this is just a breakdown of the African population in the United States if you look at where they come from. Okay? Local demographics. Again, a lot of the things are similar, but I want to put things into context. When I was doing my research a few years ago, even now, I ran across this quote here from the Kaiser Family Foundation, suggesting that there's no precise national data about HIV/AIDS among African immigrants. But when you look deeper, this is not just about this is not just about HIV/AIDS. This is about everything else. Today, if I want to know what type of cancer is more prevalent in the Asian community, I can know it's stomach cancer because the research has been done. But if you ask me the same question about the African population, we don't know that because the research has never been done. Or if it has been done, the data is so small that it's not representative of the entire population, right? So data is a big problem in the African community when it comes to knowing everything you want to know. One of the problems is when you and I, Dr. Sidibé here, and I want to thank him for coming. Dr. Sidibé is from Senegal. He's a visiting fellow at the George Mason University. He was so nice to drive with me today. When you walk down the street and you see an African American, we fill out the same form. We both check the same box that say black or African Americans, right? So when they collect that data and they say 25% of African Americans are unemployed, for example, almost always those numbers are almost wrong because they put everybody of black skin color into one category, right? But so if I want to use that information to know how many of that are Africans, there's no way for me to know that. So it's a problem for someone like me because I want to be able to, for example, let's take health. I want to be able to collect data surveillance reports and go to council and say, well, for the past 10 years, 25% of residents who've been diagnosed with cancer are Africans. And of that number, I want to be able to say, of this number, 10% speak this language, 20% speak Amharic, the other 20% are from East Africa, and so on and so on. I want to be able to show numbers currently, and I want to be able to tell them, if it keeps going this way, over the next 10 years, this is how it's going to be. And for someone like me, I need that information to be able to implement education outreach program targeting French speakers, targeting Amharic speakers, or targeting East Africans. That's the whole point of having targeted outreach programs. Because if that's not done that way, we just do outreach programs, we throw it out there, and we just hope somebody will run into it. And that's often always not efficient, and it doesn't hit my target population. So that's the issue. At the local level, this is what it looks like. We are the second, the DMV, District of Columbia, Maryland, Virginia, we are the second metropolitan area with the largest number of African immigrants. New York is the first one, 212,000. And I tell you what, over the next 5 years, I bet you that this number will get higher than the New York number. Because DC, this area is becoming top destination choice for African immigrants. Why? Because of economic opportunity, because of diversity, cultural diversity, because of the lifestyle, we're hip too, we want to be part of it. So Atlanta is the third one, LA, Minneapolis, which has a very large Ethiopian and Somali population in the area. Most refugees, which they actually do have a very good refugee resettlement program. So we are the second largest metropolitan area. Maryland has about 120 African immigrants. Maryland, state of Maryland. District of Columbia, we have about 18,000 African immigrants, and the rest is from Virginia. And these numbers aren't correct. The numbers aren't accurate because you have to factor in, these are the numbers that we know. You have to factor in those that do not want to be counted. You have to factor in those that are maybe undocumented, and they don't want to know who they are, right? And you have to factor in those, again, who just don't want to be part of the process. So I will be 100%, I'm not a bettor, but if I was a betting man, I would probably say this number is close to 175. So we have about 16 to 18,000 African immigrants. The reason why I say 16 to 18, again, is the numbers isn't accurate. There's population undercount, and we do know that based on the census, that immigrants are usually undercounted, including African immigrants. Are you familiar with the wards? In DC, we have wards, and African immigrants lived in Ward 4, 5, and 1. and 7, 6, and 8. There are reasons behind it. I don't want to get too philosophical about it, but they are sort of spread respectively eastward. In DC, Ethiopian population is the largest. So I sort of wanted to show you, it's Ethiopian in DC and in entire DMV is 38%, right? Nigeria is the second largest. In the DMV is 16%, right? Ghana, 10% in DC. It's also 10% in the entire DMV. Cameroon, Eritrea, and so on and so on. In the public school system, DCPS, over 30 African languages are spoken in DCPS, not including French. And 50 African countries are represented, which tells you that the District of Columbia is a very diverse, has a very diverse African population, even in Maryland. Which also confirms what I mentioned earlier, that DC is becoming top destination choice for Africa, including people like me. We come to DC for job opportunities, come to DC because our family is already here, come to DC because of, the lifestyle, well, not the lifestyle, but the cost of living is an issue, even though it's very expensive, but we tend, because we're not really tied to anything, we can get up now and go to Chicago if Chicago is in a better opportunity. I will tell you that in the next 10 years, Boston will probably be the same, the next DC, because Detroit is going to, I'm sorry, I meant to say Detroit, it's going to, hard economic situation right now, but it will get better. It will get better, and you'll probably see a lot of immigrant population going to Detroit for stuff. All right. 84% of the African population is of the working age, which, if you think a little bit about what that means when it comes to the job market, to taxes and revenues, you start to get a better sense of the economic impact of the African community when it comes to investment, when it comes to taxes, when it comes to wages, when it comes to all of that, creating jobs and employment. 35% of the African-born residents have lived in DC for less than 10 years, right? 47% between 10 to 19 years, and you have 19% that's been living here for 20 years or more. So you have a lot of, like in DC, you have a lot of cab drivers that have been living in DC for about, some 15, 20 years, some longer. So, which means that the African population is here to stay. 33% of African population in DC have invested in home mortgage loans. And this is more than New York and Los Angeles combined. Which, again, if you think about how property taxes, how much money we invest, as far as how much money we pay to the city in terms of tax dollars, which is used for education, which is used for transportation, which is used for so many different things, you will get a better sense of our economic contribution, even though it's very hard to quantify because no one keeps data of how much money Africans are spending daily. And that's one of the problems that I mentioned earlier, right? So in 2005, there's an article published on the Washington Examiner by Brian Hughes. He said in the article that between 2005 and 2010, the metropolitan area had a 200,000 increase in the number of immigrants. The African population increased at the swiftest pace, 30%. And he was the same guy who mentioned that if you look at the rate in which we're growing, is faster than those from Latin American countries. When it comes to education, the African population is better educated than all immigrant groups. In fact, 1 out of 3 PhD holders is from Africa, right? So the top 2 in red are the education attainment of foreign-born versus the US-born, right? 17% of the foreign-born has a BA versus 20% of the US-born. 12% of the foreign-born have a graduate degree versus 11.5%. The item in red are the African immigrants versus the US-born. 42% of African immigrants do have a bachelor's degree versus 41% of the 41% of the foreign-born population. 16% do have a graduate degree versus 16.6%. This is not a surprise because for the most part, when we come here, we come to go to school, we get an education, and we actually do get an education, right? Even though it may be tougher for some than others, but African immigrants do fairly well, the most educated among all immigrant groups. And I think it's just something that should be applauded. This is what it looks like overall. 42% in the DMV would again, bachelor's degree versus 41%. 42.6% of African male do have a bachelor's degree or higher versus 47%. And 33% of females, African, do have a bachelor's degree. So if you look at the numbers this way, you see that we do fairly well. We fare pretty well against the foreign-born and against anybody else, right? Which tells you a lot about Africans, right? So, including my friend here, Dr. Sidibe, one of those guys with a PhD. He was actually trying to convince me in a way that I need to get a PhD. So some of the challenges that we face. Again, African immigrants are generally healthier than all immigrant groups. And we can understand it, it's easy to understand. When we come here, we tend to come at a young age. We tend to come at a very young age, working age. I came when I was 18, 17 years old, 16 years old. So most do come at a very young age. And compared to other immigrant groups, we are the healthiest. And we do keep up physically, keep up with our health. But that doesn't mean we don't have challenges. When you look down, when you drill down with that data, actually the information is pretty scary when you look at the health challenges that we face, even though we generally report superior health status. And this came straight out of the U.S. Racial Disparities in Health magazine. Right? So what are the challenges that we face? Access to care is the first challenge. When I say access, I don't mean just being able to drive to the hospital, but having insurance coverage, for example, is a big problem. 25% nationwide do lack health insurance coverage versus 26.2%. And I think these numbers are actually way higher than we're reporting. These are just the numbers that we know. But there may be some college students that do not have health insurance. There may be a single mom that doesn't have health insurance that no one knows of. Those that are undocumented, for example, because which brings another issue dealing with stigma and stereotype, right? Lack of understanding of the issues, right? Because think about a couple of months ago where the Ebola crisis hit. We experienced this issue firsthand because there was a lot of people who felt as though Ebola is the African, thing, or cab drivers that are African do have Ebola. So we brought the issue about stigma and stereotype, and which is something that we need to address. We need to address it by facilitating conversation, discussion on the issues that we all face, to be able to understand that, hey, the hospital is not a place you just go when you're going to die. You have to go for preventive care, right, to make sure that medical, that issue that you may be dealing with 5 years from now and spending $10,000, if you go now, maybe you don't have to go through that, right? So lack of insurance is a big problem in the African community. And I'm hoping with the new Obamacare, after it goes into, now that has gone into effect, we'll look at the numbers 5 years from now and see. Those that are most at risk are in everything: employment, education, health. There's a group that is most at risk, which are those that have been living in the U.S. between 0 to 5 years, and mostly those that are from East African countries. Why 0 to 5 years? When someone is here between 0 to 5 years, they are less likely to understand the complicated healthcare system, right? In Africa, most health insurance are government-sponsored. When you come here, you deal with HMOs, PPOs, POSs, fee-for-service. No one knows, even doctors don't know what they are. So you have someone, a young immigrant, it takes time. Between 0 to 5 years, they are less likely to be stable economically, financially, to be able to get a job and get a good health insurance. When they are here between 0 to 5 years, they are less likely to just be stable and be able to navigate by themselves. So it becomes a problem, right? Immigration status is another problem. And of course, language and cultural barrier is another problem. Because when they come here, like in my own case, I didn't speak English that well. So even you may have an immigrant who comes from English-speaking countries, when they do come to the U.S., they do face language barriers. So people have suggested they need to have interpretation when you go to certain facilities. But those are limited, because if you are my doctor, and I come to you, and this gentleman is interpreting what you're saying to me, the gentleman may be able to tell me, take this pill twice a day. But the gentleman, who doesn't know the medical terminology that you know, that I may want to need to know, this gentleman may not be able to provide that to me. So that you become limited in a way, right? So language and cultural barriers not so much, But language barrier is a big issue. We deal with culture barriers when you have maybe different practices that is not favored here where someone holds the idea. But all of these are barriers to progress and growth for African immigrants. Speaking of data, right? Lack of adequate data is another issue. I just talked about it. The fact that we are not able to analyze trends over time. We should be able to analyze current trends, predict trends over time, and be able to go to policymakers and propose policy recommendations that help address not just current problems, but problems that are coming 5 to 10 years from now. We should be able to look at the rate of infection in HIV in the African population and be able to say, over the next 5 years, this is where it will be. We need to address it at this level now. Otherwise, it will cost this many lives. It will cost this much money. It will impact the society in so many ways. And they need to know this because money is investing to address these problems, let's say 10 years from now. But if they can spend less now to fix the problem, maybe it will save so much time. So this is actually data that I received from the CDC, I believe, which, for example, suggested that sample of 687, right? 44% are from Africa, which I sort of I question because is this everybody who's black or African Americans? It just seems too high for me, and which confirms what I said this quote earlier that there's no precise data on African Americans when it comes to things like this, and we need to know this, right? This is another data that I received from the DC Cancer Registry, right? And it's alarming in many different ways because between 1996, which is when the district started, I believe the cancer registry, to 2009, there were a total of 45,119 cases, cancer diagnosed cases in the District of Columbia. When you look at the item in yellow, African countries, in 1996 there were only 6, right? In 2009 there were 60, which may be true. But the question is, if you look at the unknown, how many of those are Africans that we need to know? How many of those are from East Africa? How many of those are Francophones? How many of those are from South Africa that we may need to know? Which brings the question of the data the record keeping, collecting country of birth information, right? When you go check out a doctor who fill out a form, requiring people to submit their country of birth information and language spoken information, because I want to know that. And I'm sure researchers here want to know that too, to be able to go back and propose policy recommendations that say between 1996 and 2009, you had 10,000 African immigrants, for example, and half of them will speak French, half of them are from this country, 2 of them are from this country. Those are the information that we need to be able to move forward. Otherwise, we're just going blindly. So this is very alarming to me when I first saw this. The unknown population. How many of those are black or white or female? How many of those are Muslims? How many of those are, all of those impact actually our well-being and eventually impact how much money we spend and the resources we dedicate to addressing these problems. Another example. This is also from the cancer registry, right? Highlighted in yellow, 11,186 total cases, right, in the cancer registry. And these are African countries. There were a total of 577 African Americans in the cancer registry, right? But so out of 11,000, there was only 577 African, which is a very low number, which makes me question actually how many of that remaining 9,000 something, 10,000 something are Africans that are not on this list. How many of them speak French, for example? How many of them are from East Africa? Of those, who's been living here between 0 to 5 years? Who's been living here between 10 to 20 years or longer? Those are the information that we need to know. For example, there's only 8 from Senegal, which is good. You know, we don't want high numbers, but we just don't want to miss numbers that we don't need to miss in this group. So these are the challenges that we have in record keeping, systematic record keeping. and policy recommendations that suggest that a better record-keeping mechanism, a better record-keeping process, collecting, again, country of birth, language spoken information, all of those kind of information that will be useful for policymakers and administrators. Any questions? No? Good. Let's talk about jobs a little bit and economic contributions and everything else. Something to brag about, right? The African immigrant population has a purchase power of $50 billion, according to the World Bank. And experts predict that this number will go from 50 billion to 250 billion over the next 10 years. We spend about $50 billion in revenues in Africa, contributing to, I think if I remember correctly, if this would have been the 6th largest GDP, if we take all the money that we spend as Africans to Africa, it would have been the 6th largest nation, or the GDP, something like that. So again, which tells you, give you a good sense of not just our impact, but also our financial impact, how much money we are contributing to not just the development of the United States, but of these African countries. Compared to California, New York, and Illinois, those that are in Maryland do have the highest unemployment rate. I don't know why that is. I tried to find out why African Americans in Maryland have the highest unemployment rate. Something worth looking at. But among the other problems that we face is the issue dealing with brain waste and brain drain. When we leave Africa, you have a lot of those that are highly educated. They leave Africa to come to the United States for better opportunities, right? So Africa is losing out the brain drain phenomenon, because you have the experts, the doctors, the physicists that are coming here. So you have those, the impact there. But when we come here, we face another challenge. And I know plenty of people like this. One came to my office last week. He was a doctor back home, did a lot of work on reducing the impact of HIV transmission from mother to child. He's unemployed, can't find work, because he's a doctor back home, but he's not a doctor here. His degree is unrecognized, right? His license doesn't allow him to practice it, so he's got to reconvert. He's got to find another path to go back to practicing, which is an issue. That's brain waste. You have these highly competent African immigrants that are lawyers or doctors, but when they come here, because of the way the system is set up, their degrees are unrecognized. They have to end up taking low-income jobs, mostly cab drivers, working in hotels, right? Which you think of the amount of knowledge that is just, being wasted, the amount of knowledge that could be transferred to young college students, but it's not being done so, right? You think of the impact, because someone who is a doctor, for example, let's say the person is supposed to be making in the United States $175,000, should be paying more money in taxes, could possibly open a small business, hire maybe 2 college students during the summer, right? Could be purchasing a home, paying income taxes, could be buying a car, all of the money that could be going into the economy. But now this one person is working at a hotel, making maybe $37,000. Think of the gap there, the impact that it's having on the population. And most often what happens is someone will say, well, I'll go work as a cab driver for a couple of years, and they end up being stuck there for a long time. They never go back to doing what they're supposed to do. So you have this amount of knowledge that is being wasted. So when you look at refugee resettlement programs or immigrant resettlement programs, there's some states that are making brain waste a priority, addressing brain waste. Canada has done a good job at addressing brain waste. And what I've suggested that instead of letting these guys sitting here, because think about it, someone come from Senegal and they want to enroll here at George Mason. And they tell me, send us your sealed transcripts. In most of those countries, they don't have the system where you have to enter your last 4 of your social security number. It takes years to get your transcript. So you got to get it from back home, especially when you come from a country that's at war. It takes time. You got to maybe give somebody some money to get you your transcript. They have to send it to an institution in New York to get it evaluated. And they have to send it from there to the school. That takes a year. What do you do for a year? Do you just sit there and just wait for, some of these have families, they have to work. So they end up working in gas stations, and they sort of lose interest, to be honest. That's resource being wasted. So people are proposing brain circulation, the new brain circulation. If I'm a doctor, instead of just letting me work as a cab driver, let me teach health education courses at a one-on-one at a university or high school. At least there's some amount of knowledge that I can transfer to students, or where they can gain from my experience. If you look at Massachusetts, these states have made brain waste a priority. What they've done in Idaho is, for example, letting refugees to take exams in their language, like before being a daycare, because some of these may not speak English, and to require them to do it pass it in English may be a challenge, but maybe you can let them take the test in Amharic or French, and they can still work, contribute positively to the economy, and not rely on government funding for things that they could probably do for themselves. And most likely, they don't want anyone to do for them. They want to do for themselves. In DC, we have an act called the Language Access Act, which essentially gives immigrants the right to receive service in their own language. If you come to my office and you don't speak French, you don't speak English, and you want an interpreter, I have to provide you an interpreter. When we have an event, last week the mayor had her State of the District address, I had to pay for interpretation for those who speak French or Amharic. It is just one way to allow them to integrate easily than otherwise. So what do we do going forward? Going forward, there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of challenges here, including more research. You can never have enough research. We need to know, again, I need to know, if I wanted to know, I should be able to know exactly how many Africans are right now at George Mason University. I don't even know if that exists. I should be able to know right now, of all the Africans that are here, which country are they from, right? I should be able to know exactly how many of those are engineers. We need to be able to have research that allow us to learn those kind of information. Data-driven process, a process where I can use the information to drive policy, right? We need to be able to have a better system to record data. Health surveillance reports that states do, I think they send it to the CDC. We need to be able to take that information and know of the 5,000 that visited a particular hospital last year, where are they from, what language they speak, what are the challenges they face, and so on and so on. It is very hard for someone like me to go to policymakers and say, give me more budget for health education programs, but I don't justify it. I need to be able to justify it. I need to be able to justify, why do I need more money for health education programs? Is my population at risk? What are they at risk for? So those are issues that we need to do. And there's, of course, obviously more advocacy, right? More advocacy, more collaboration with other institutions, and being able to, again, produce reports, white papers, and do more of this type of presentation discussions to be able to help the community move forward, which brings me to this, right? So my office, for the past couple of years, has been collecting data. This was called the We Count Initiative. This was our first effort to at least try to come up with hardcore data on the African population. So we designed this survey, and now I'm at an education facility, so I know there's a lot of PhDs and a lot of graduate students that may be interested in taking a new challenge. I have about 1,000 of these in my office. We don't have the resources or the manpower to actually analyze it and come up with the data that we need. We've done the hard work already. We already collected it. We just need someone to analyze it for us or help us analyze it, which is the first part. So we were hoping by doing this, right, eventually we'll be able to analyze the information to do exactly what I just spent the last 15 minutes saying. That when I go to the mayor or when I go to anywhere, right, when I go to the District Department of Zoning or what, I should be able to say, hey, did you know that 25% of African immigrants in the District of Columbia speak this language? They live in this ward, they do such and such, or they live in Ward 6 or whatever. That information is lacking. There's a gap. We've also included this, which is the second part of the survey, for businesses. We wanted to capture African business owners, because when they go register for their license, they don't ask them which country are you from. unless they tell them. And we should be able to know how many African businesses are in the District of Columbia and what businesses do they own. So this was our effort, and I think it was a good effort to be able to capture that information. So again, this is just another invitation for collaboration for the students, your partners, that are looking for a new challenge, ready to take them on. So I think with that, that's all I had. If you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them. Thank you.